Welcome to day 3 of the Cinder part of the Yoga PTG. Um, Please sign in on the Etherpad. Um, let's see, just some people had some second thoughts, so we can take a quick look. Oh, yeah, so an announcement from yesterday. So during happy hour, we discussed the giving a name to the teams, to the logos, the horse, and also a name for the team. And Simon had come up with a name that did double duty. So Argo is the name of Xena the Warrior Princess's horse, and the Argonauts were, I don't know exactly who they were, but they were like a group of adventurers that hung around with Jason. So you had Jason and the Argonauts. So we're going to be the Argonauts. So, and Jay already tweeted it out yesterday. So there's a link to the tweet if you want to look. So the whole world already knows about this. And then Simon mocked up so we have the mascot, but he mocked up a logo that maybe we could, if somebody's got like Photoshop skills, we could do something with that. And actually, I have a niece who's a professional artist, so maybe I can lean on her a little bit to fancy it up. I mean, it looks kind of cool. Just the horse needs to, sort of curve a bit so it looks like it's on the sail. And I think we need to have some cinder blocks show up somewhere in that picture too. Maybe instead of the shields, we could have cinder blocks along the boat. Anyway, okay, so that
Using
happened.
the old logo, maybe something
Oh
similar
yeah,
to the old logo.
I'll have to see if I can dig that up. I bet somebody's got to have PNGs of that somewhere. So, okay. Yeah, now the other thing that happened was we took the team photo, but due to my system crashing and hanging everybody up, I think we lost a lot of people um, yesterday who decided not to come back. So we only have 8 people in the team photo. So, which is okay. There are good 8 people, but it might be nicer to have more. So maybe we can do that tomorrow at some point. So be aware of that. Either that or
So Brian, I also took some photos and I can share if you think
oh,
some of
okay,
them like it has all people.
okay. It's either that or I can like copy and paste stuff from other photos and just slap people into the screen to make it look like they were there. So we'll figure something out. Um, Now the other thing, so so I could do some feedback about how the volume driver API session went yesterday. I thought it went pretty well. It's kind of slow going, but that's because we're looking at it and trying to figure out how to describe it, what's there. So I thought it went pretty well, but right, I don't think we'll finish it on Friday. And in the meantime, the TC is having a special, well, I don't know if it's a special meeting, but they're adding special time. I should put this actually in the announcements. They're adding special time to discuss the community goal of secure RBAC because it's turning out that there's a complication that's like holy moly.
Brian,
Yeah.
is it an additional complication or is the one that came up during
It's
the
the same one.
conversation?
Right,
Okay.
it's the one that we discussed. So let me give you a link to because the first sentence in this is kind of funny.
Yeah, no, but at least I don't have to get scared.
Right. So I think,
With
right. So, well, who knows what's going to happen, right, as this gets discussed more. Right, but during the various projects discussion, we found there are many issues/open questions for the new RBAC, especially on system scope. And that's kind of an understatement. So anyway, so they're going to be discussing that Friday, 13:30 to 15 UTC, which is going to eat into sort of our stuff. What I'm thinking of doing, Gorka, if this is okay with you, you're scheduled to talk about quotas at 13:30. Maybe let's kick off the day with you tomorrow and start with quotas. And then I'm thinking we may need to attend, some of us at least need to attend this meeting. I want to, and I think it would be helpful for others to go. So I'm thinking maybe move, I don't want to do this, but I don't know what else to do. Cancel the clarify the volume drivers thing. And I think what we can do, so tell me if this isn't, I think what we need to do is do like a function of the week and maybe either set aside 15 minutes in each Cinder meeting or do something after Sophie's bug squad meeting and just do one of these functions each week. So sometimes it'll be more than one because some of them are related, but that way we can at least be making some headway. Now, the thing about a function of the week is we've got 20 weeks from now until RC time, and there's about, I just eyeballed it, there's about 36 or so driver functions. So while we might not finish in yoga, we'd at least get a pretty good start, and at least people doing drivers, if they start implementing the functions alphabetically, they'll have more guidance as they go. So anyway, so let me know what you think of that. So I'm thinking I'm going to reshuffle tomorrow and remove move stuff around. So we're not going to have 2 hours to work on the driver API. But I think it's important to get this done, and we just have to figure out a systematic way to do it. So my idea is driver of the week. Let me know what you think.
Well, for one, I think that it doesn't matter if we finish it in this release, in the next, because this is about documenting and improving. It's not kind of a feature, all or nothing. Any little or big improvement in our documentation for the methods will be really helpful.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
So
maybe let's.
It's fine with the.
Okay.
I'm okay with the every week at least one method. And if we can do more, better.
Okay. All right. We'll give that a try and see how it goes. All right. So anyway, I'll rearrange the schedule later, but roughly it'll be Gorka will kick off with quotas. Then we'll go to the secure RBAC thing. I'll try to. We may have some time in between Glance and Nova. I'll slap up an Etherpad because I have some ideas in my head, but I haven't written them down yet about what specific things for Cinder we are going to have to address. So I want to at least have, because the current personas they have don't capture what we need. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Okay. I guess the other thing was someone left a big comment about the driver interface and we discussed removing attach volume. Okay, it was
yep.
Gorka and Red.
Yep.
Okay. I was wondering if that was you or not. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I started looking at the changes that we discussed yesterday and looking into writing patches for them. So I started with attach and detach removal that only one driver solidifier was implementing it, and there I wrote a patch. My only concern is, besides Fernando coming back to us on whether NetApp agrees to remove this or not, is the fact that by removing these methods, we could be leaving leftover metadata on the storage array that some user may go see attachment type, instance ID, and it's out of sync and irrelevant because we are no longer removing it. So the thing is, we either accept that as, yeah, whatever, that's what you have, or we would have to implement in the driver some kind of code that checks and removes it, and that's the cleanup, or something like that. For now, I just mentioned in the release note that, yep, we're going to leave garbage there. Assume that everything is out of sync from this moment onwards. I wanted to mention that one. It's not a big deal if nobody's using it. If somebody's using it, it's more problematic. The other one was when I started looking at the removal of the check for setup error method. to join the do setup and that method into one. And the thing is that since drivers inherit one from another, there are cases where they override. For example, they leverage the parents' do setup method, but ignore the parents' check for errors method, and they implement their own. Other times they use the other one, so it starts to get funny in some drivers, and in others, it's harder to figure out what is used in and what not. So my idea that I started working on is to create a setup-based setup method. Instead of calling do setup, and then the other one we call setup, just setup. And that one is the one that calls the two methods. And if a driver just have a single method, can replace it, and that's fine. It's using the new interface. And if not, it's using the old interface that can use one of the two or both methods. That's the solution I'm going with, and it's not looking too bad in terms of coding. What it's looking like is that it's going to basically, if I'm lucky, there are two files that I'm not going to touch. Let's put it that way, because there are going to be they are small changes, but almost in every driver, plus all the tests. I made changes to almost all the drivers. There are 5 or 6 files pending to change, and there were 930 something failures in the tests. So, but I think it's just wanted to bring it up and mention that the patch is not going to be as nice as I originally thought, as in, just remove a couple of things, everything works. But well, that's it.
All right. Well, wow.
But
yeah, I guess
the Cinder interface is nicer, at least for new drivers.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, if we decide to go that way, we can parcel out that work. So we're all working on like 100 tests instead of you working on 900.
Probably they are mostly the same things over and over. Mocking do setup. Now I need to mock setup instead. Small things, but
yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for following up on that. All right. That'll be good. All right. I guess let's move along. So Rajat, you're on first with optimize, create, boot. Oh, I should ask, are there anybody else have any comments or questions or announcements from yesterday or about tomorrow? All right, cool. Okay. Oh, as far as Lance is going to join us and Nova's going to join us also. So we're here for all the sessions today. So makes it easier on us. Okay, Rajat, I will be quiet and let you take this.
Yeah, hi. So I would like to start with like the glance Cinder backend. So we have an optimization in that code path, like when we create a volume from an image, then it clones the image volume, and that's a very fast operation rather than like attaching the volume, copying the image, and all that sort of stuff. So we have an optimization in that case, but it's only for raw volumes. And I was thinking about doing the same for QCow to volumes. Like I thought there is an additional step of just converting it to raw. So what I did was initially when we cloned that volume, I attached both the volumes, the new volume and the old image volume. I did a convert image from previous to new volume, like the QCow to convert it to raw. From source is the image volume and destination is the new volume I created. It was failing somehow on some conditions, so I didn't I wanted to make this work, so I didn't go through very much. So what I did was an alternative route. Like I cloned the volume. It contains the QCow image right now. I attached it. I copied the QCow image to the temporary directory we have, and then did the convert image again back to the volume to raw. Like it's like going around the path. But somehow my idea is to, like, we already have the QCOW2 image in the image volume, so just do a convert image on it and just put it into the new volume. So that's kind of some optimization I was thinking in this case.
But yet I have a concern because I don't really see the optimization really. For example, if you cannot directly clone and that's it, and if you have to read and convert, then where is really the optimization?
So in this case, we are not downloading the image from Glance. We already have that image in the Cinder volume. Like if we do it normally, currently what the flow is, like that image volume gets attached to the Glance host, then we download the volume image from Glance to Cinder into the conversion directory, and then we convert it into the new volume. So I'm skipping the whole attaching that volume to the Glance host and then copying the image from Glance to Cinder. That whole part I'm skipping in this case. I'm just directly taking the image volume, taking the QCOW2 from it, and just converting and putting into the new volume.
But I don't think that's going to save as much time as you think. And we have, for example, if we use the cache in Cinder, that's going to be a lot faster than this option. I'm not seeing a real, like, when I say that I don't see a real benefit is because we are still transferring every bit of the QCOW from the source. The source can be a Cinder volume or it can be Glance, but after all, we are moving all the data, and then we are writing all the data to the volume. So, and those are the big movements, getting the QCOW and expanding the QCOW into the raw volume. Those are the things that take a lot of time, and we are still going to have them. We are just going to improve in terms of if Glance is slow giving us the data, we are now probably going to be faster if we are, for example, using Fiber Channel directly from the volume. That is the improvement we are going to get, and only from when getting the QCOW. When writing, we are going to have the same path. I mean the same speed because it's the same connection.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The only changes I see from that code path, like I totally agree that we are somehow copying from a source to destination, which is same if you do it from Glance. But the attachment and the detachment, all the calls that we initialize all the connection and everything, that gets skipped in this case. And second case I was thinking is when we are creating multiple volumes from image, then we won't have that problem of the volume staying in use. Like we have this problem since long. That's why I implemented that multi-attach scenario on the Glance store side. Like we could attach that Cinder volume.
Okay, so what you're trying is to reduce the stress on Glance. This is not an optimization for Cinder or for the data itself, is because otherwise Glance, if it gets multiple requests for the same image, it's not that great, right?
Yeah, that's one case I had in mind with this. And the other one was like just removing that detach calls to that volume.
But the attach detach will get done in Cinder anyway. So we're just moving them. The time it takes, we just shift the attach of a volume. We shift it from Glance to Cinder because now Cinder has the QCOW, so in a volume, so it will need to attach that one.
No. So previously we used to attach both the volumes, one on Glance host, one on Cinder host, and then we used to copy the data. But right now the image volume is not attached anywhere. We're just cloning it, and then we are attaching the destination one only, and then doing this copy.
But the copy,
okay,
You
Okay,
have to
okay.
attach to copy the QCal. That's why I say that you're shifting just the attach of the QCal.
Yeah, the initial approach requires both to be attached. I was like, this patch implements a different roundabout approach, but yeah. So yeah, we need to attach them. So basically,
I
that,
I
that
think if we want to do, I'm sorry if you have already spent time on this, but I don't think this is a real optimization for Cinder, in my opinion.
I think it okay. Yeah, I think it could be beneficial when Glance is on a different host. Maybe in that case.
But what I think is, from a deployment perspective, if I am an operator and I have cloud, what I would try to do is either use golden images in golden volumes in Cinder from a glance image if I have a performance problem, or use the Cinder cache that makes it faster, kind of invisible to the users, and the Cinder cache would solve also the problem of glance doing the attach of the same volume in multiple locations, because Cinder would just have to clone it. So I'm not sure this is really.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out these things, yeah, I also feel like it's not bringing much to the much optimization to the current flow. Uh,
Rajat,
yeah, I can.
was going to say,
Yeah,
could
sorry.
you like write out in the Etherpad the current workflow and then the change you want to make? Because I'm losing exactly where the optimization is happening. So if you could write that out, it would kind of help. I mean, just off the top of your head, and then we can refine stuff as we need to. But it would be kind of helpful to see what the current workflow is and where you're going to intervene to optimize.
Yeah, so basically, like as discussed with Gorka, it was mostly like shifting things from glance end to the sender end. But yeah, I will write that out on the Etherpad. I can think about a little more if uh, it could be improved or anything. But yeah, right now I also don't think it's changing much.
I guess, okay. Then maybe I won't ask any more questions.
One question about glance that probably either Rajat or Brian can help me with. Does glance sometimes store as metadata or something else the type of the image and the real size, the virtual size of the image? Because I think Glance had some kind of introspection that could be turned on to gather some of these facts. I don't know if we have a way of getting that.
I don't know that there's I know there's I don't know. Let's ask the Glance people when we meet later what the state of that is. I know Dan had implemented if you import an image, I believe now it will calculate the virtual size and will include that. But I think if you do the standard upload, that just puts the image into Glance, and all you have is the actual size in bytes.
Okay,
So,
because I'm seeing a possible optimization there in Cinder. One that brings a lot of problems for our customers, which is filling up the temporary image directory. Because part of the process is actually figuring out the virtual size and a lot of things like that. So if we already have it in the metadata from the image, we can skip probably the temporary conversion that we do, I think, locally.
well, Rajat had talked about this at some point, because I think because what we could do, but maybe there was a problem with this and that's why we didn't do it. I was thinking what we could do is, even if Glance doesn't know the virtual size, we know it after we've done the conversion. And maybe we should just update the image with that property so that it's there for future use. But there was I think there was an objection on the Glance side to that, and it may have been that a regular user I can't remember. But so that's one way we could make things easier for the second time you needed to use that image. But there was also, anyway, so we can discuss that with the Glance people.
Yeah, and we could even try to do some kind of weird thing and just have a cache of virtual sizes, like the normal volume cache. We just cache it. If we cannot store it in Glance, we'll store it ourselves. And clean it up periodically or whatever and save time there. Yeah.
Okay. I'm
something to explore.
Yeah.
I think the discussion around this was when we are like downloading image from Glance, then we check the virtual size of it on the sender side. And the idea was to like Glance to include that virtual size. And in the contrary case, when we are uploading a volume image, then we will supply that virtual size to Glance. Because in that case, they can't calculate it. So that's what I remember on both ends, like to avoid unnecessary checks on both sides or performing QMG info on both sides. We were just thinking of shifting the commands to one side.
Okay, so basically, you're gonna think about this some more, Rajat, and then we can discuss at a Cinder meeting or something. That's fine. Any other questions, observations? Okay, all right. Okay, I'll let you finish the workflow, and we just get it real quick.
So one thing I wanted to ask, like, I think the cache only works for raw volumes, or does it work for QCOW as well?
Well, it only stores as raw volumes, if I remember correctly. I don't know if it works for QCOW. If it doesn't work for QCOW, that would be a possible optimization. Kind of convert downloading the QCOW and writing it as raw. But I think what currently does is creates a normal volume, which is a raw volume. So it downloads, expands, writes the volume, and that is the cache volume that then clones. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think we are doing the conversion for that one.
I think that's right, because we need it to get this speed of the cloning. We need to have it ready to use. So I'm pretty sure we do the conversion first.
Yeah.
So your idea is sort of to bypass the image volume cache, since if we're using the Cinder backend, we just have the volume sitting there anyway?
So it was kind of the same idea, but like somehow I thought like doing it from Glance to Cinder was slower than doing it from Cinder to Cinder. But somehow thinking now, it seems like the same thing on both the cases.
Well, may not be the same one, because there are customers using huge images. And Glance, after all, it's Python, and it's serving data through Python. So you may want to run some tests and see the performance improvements. But the thing is that the performance improvement should be tested not with a single image download. Well, you test it with a single image download, you get the difference in numbers. But then you need to test with 10 downloads. Why? Because one of the things we kind of discuss with people coming up, for example, for the backup service, when they say, I want to optimize, create a lot of threads, because then the throughput is better when writing, we say, yeah, one backup is faster, but we may be doing 20 simultaneously. We don't want to go crazy with like create hundreds of threads to optimize, because then the overall performance get degraded. In this case, we may see an improvement or a worse situation from your new code if we do 1 or if we do 10. So it's necessary to test at least with parallel downloads from Glance, because maybe Glance is a bottleneck and we want to do something different. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I can check on that. Somehow, like the only thing reduced here is that API call with Glance. Yeah.
Well, the difference is that we remove the middleman, and depending on the speed of the middleman, which is Glance, it may be good enough to skip it. It may be a good idea.
Okay. Yeah, I can work on some like some script to time down the performance. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me just. Okay, thanks, Gorka.
Look at the optimization you mentioned. I think that takes place in this one because we are just attaching the volume and not doing any copy to the image conversion dir in this case.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that is something that, in your case, it's an added bonus besides getting rid of the middleman. So maybe adding everything turns out that the performance is improved a lot more than I originally thought.
Yeah, I think I need to think more about this, and yeah, I will put down like the possible cases where this could benefit us.
Well, I think more than writing them, it could be enough, at least for me, to if we have performance improvement. If there is a justification of, yeah, we get this percentage of improvement, it is enough for me to add code.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Good. Okay. Okay.
This one is yours.
Yeah, so this one's me. Let me grab my notes. Okay. All right, so what this is, let me Just lost where I am in the Etherpad. Okay.
By the way, Brian, your Etherpad connection is not sharing the Etherpad. It's just connected.
So you're not seeing it?
Yep. Well, I see that it is connected Cinder Etherpad, but I just see the CE and not the video.
Oh,
I think you need to switch to that content and people to say it was the
Ooh,
slider.
yes, that was.
oh,
Thanks,
okay.
Rajat.
All right, good. Okay, so let me look at this real quick. So this made sense. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. So the whole point about this is this comment that I just put the link on line 344. So also use exception to detail mapping to decrease the workload of classifying event in Cinder's task code. And that's the whole issue here. So just a quick thing about the user messages, because not everybody has used them. We've got that link on line 345 that's to the docs about using this. And the basic idea here is discussing that general information, but quickly, it's just, right, we have a lot of calls where we return like a 202 for accepted, and then maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And you eventually look at your volume and it's in some kind of non-good state, and you're wondering, how did it get there? So we've got these user messages so that you can make a call to a user message, and if we have generated one, you can see it there and then get some information that will help you troubleshoot or would help you to, give more information when you call in for help or whatever, right? And the problem is a lot of our operations fail for reasons due to configuration or something that's happening on the back end or something that's occurred that we don't want normal people, end users, to know about, because they're supposed to be dealing in the abstraction of volumes and volume types. They don't need to know about which back end it's on and how it's stored, anything like that. So what was decided way back when this was introduced was that we would have predefined messages that are generic enough so that you don't expose details, but detailed enough so that you know what happened and you can know who to ask for help. And then it turned out that we actually needed to have two dimensions of messages, so actions and details. So there is something in the user messages that we should remove, and I guess I'll just put up a patch for that, because we got some old stuff that we needed to hang around in case any of those messages needed to be translated, but that was in Pike, and I think by now everything's gone. So with the user messages, that they get automatically removed after a certain amount of time. So each message gets a time to live that's configurable by the operator, and there's a reaping interval when we have a process that goes through and just gets rid of all the ones that are outdated. Anyway, so you basically have two things. You got an action that gives you the context for what's going on. So an example would be copy image to volume. That's the operations that's happening. And then you have a detail, and that's what exactly is the reason why that failed. So maybe your quota was exceeded or not enough space on the device. So the combination of those two things gives the user some information to tell the operator, hey, the device is filled up or whatever. Okay, so.
And additionally, just
Okay.
as a side note, one of the things that adds is that you get the request ID. The operator, the admin can see the request ID of the user message, and because most people don't run the command with -debug, so it's always hard for an operator to figure out where in the logs that request may have come in.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so it gives the operators much more information for doing troubleshooting. So it's a good thing. So that's great. Now, this thing that was introduced to make it, so the problem was we had all this code and we want to add user messages all over the place. but somebody has to do that, and it can be kind of a pain in the butt because you got to decide. So the idea was, if you're in a place where you get an exception, so here's an example of, so if you scroll down to usage, let me give you an exact link. I lost my, okay. So this specific place, so someplace in the code, we get a Cinder exception. And then we can go ahead and, so for this, if you can see the example in the docs, right, you got the exception no valid backend. So we do the quotas rollback, and then we go ahead and create the message. And what we could do, instead of, we just, the easy thing, the action we still have to specify. So that's message, it's the second argument we pass to message API create is the action extend volume. So that's what we were trying to do. And then instead of detail, we just slap in the exception and we don't have to worry about anything, which sounds kind of good. Now, this depends on there being an exception mapping that will map from the particular exception to a detail message. And what happens in this case, if you just pass it like this and the exception is not in the mapping, you get a detail of unknown error, which kind of sucks, but it doesn't break is the main thing. But the downside of this is if you pass a detail here, it will be ignored if the exception is in the mapping. And which seems a little counterintuitive because you'd think.
And kind of wrong, right?
Well, I thought, so when I first started working on Cinder, I put up a patch that fixed this to make it go the other way, and then realized the whole thing had been designed to go that if you pass the exception, that's what's used, and the detail is just secondary. And I can't remember the argument for why that makes sense. Well, because one way of looking at it is the exception may have more information than you do.
Well, I think it's kind of the default message is the description that you pass. And so instead of giving unknown, it could give that one.
Right.
Right? Or
Yeah.
Is the code,
Right.
if you pass an exception, does it all, and doesn't know about it, cannot do the conversion, does it go to unknown or does it go to the message?
Right, then it will go to, if you pass a detail, which we didn't do here, it will use the detail. So it's right, so exception first, then the detail, and then unknown, which sort of makes sense, except there may be places where, so in the code Rajat was working at, so there's a link at line 347, there's a patch.
347 or 348 because somebody
Well,
gets
348 now.
Yeah, sorry, that was me. I was just
That's
adding
okay.
a code to this hierarchy.
Okay.
So in that patch, you
So
were
here's,
saying,
yeah, so I thought I had a place I wanted to use as an illustration. So but the basic thing is there's sometimes where you've caught an except, well, there are places in that code where we need to create an exception that we're going to raise to get out of there. And in that case, you know exactly why you're doing it. So it might make sense to use the detail because here's the problem, right? If somebody has put that exception in the mapping and the message isn't right, if the exception is showing up in a bunch of places and it's in the mapping, then it's going to be mapped to a pretty general detail message, right? Whereas at this location, you know exactly what happened. So you could pass a detail message that says, this is what happened, right? So what I'm saying is the exception mapping seems to be problematic from the standpoint of like saving us time, which it's supposed to do, because now what you got to do is go back, is this thing in the mapping? Well, if it is that message good enough, or do I want to use my message? Might be better to just say, hey, use the message right here because I know what it is. The other thing is if somebody changes the code later and adds an exception to the mapping, you may wind up with a different message than you had thought was the case. And then that's going to suck too.
The way I see it, isn't the problem that we were not fully aware of this behavior? For example, in my case, I know that when I was reviewing Rayat's patch, I was not aware of this behavior, and I thought the preference was on the detail. So basically, the problem is that review is me. So I don't know if renaming the parameter from from detail to default detail or something like that, something, either rename it or make it in the documentation or somewhere clear what happens, what the preference is. Because in those calls, like you're saying, what we want is not to pass the exception, because in Rayat patch, he was very specific about this is the problem and this is the detail I want to have.
Except I think you brought up a really good point. This is why I'm discussing this. You brought up a really good point on there that, right, at some point it might be good for us to expose information from the exception if you're an operator. I mean, sorry, not operator. If you're a system persona type dude asking for the user message, so that you don't have to go trace through the log with the request ID. You might, right? And so an operator, it would be okay for them to see the information. But what this is going to do is if we want the detail to work, we have to not pass the exception. And then that would suck, because now if we do decide to enhance the messages API, we're going to have to go back to every place where this was called, where the create was called, and add the exception. So
we can add an optional Boolean parameter.
So sort of like a force to indicate use the detail.
Like ignore exception or whatever. Yeah. Ignore exception is not correct because it gets the wrong message, but I think you understand what getting at.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, so my question is just, we could continue to pass the exception, but only pay attention to the detail. Or we could continue to pass the exception, and if there's no detail, use what's in the mapping.
But then it gets the problem that you mentioned that was the original intention, which was use just that as a default if we don't know what the exception is.
Yeah. So, all right. So you think, so we could add a parameter that allows you at the point of creating the message to specify whether the detail should be used as the override or whether it should just be used if the exception is not in the mapping.
Or we change the parameter, we can add a parameter that instead of detail, it is force detail or use me please or whatever. So that we can differentiate between the behavior where it is the default versus the one where we say, I want to use this.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like
but there is a problem.
Might be useful. We might want to extend behavior. So I guess my conclusion for this, I think we want to encourage people to pass the exception, but we need to introduce the control over how the mapping is going to be used relative to the detail you pass. Okay, let me write that down. And then, I can put up a patch for that. All right, so.
I want to mention a similar case I faced. So we already have this snapshot is busy already in the exception mapping. And I was writing the user messages for revert to snapshot. And I faced this error and the detailed message wasn't getting logged somehow because exception gets the preference. and somehow like I want a custom message there, but somehow exception is taking preference over it. So I'm not sure like what was the discussion around why exception is getting preference over detail, because detail is more specific. We are adding a separate.
No, that's the thing, that the problem is the way that it has been named, the parameter. Is not detail, is fallback detail. Is if I cannot do the mapping, use the generic detail. It's a fallback if the mapping fails. That's the thing with naming, that it's not it doesn't give more detail. It gives less detail in some cases than the mapping. It's the fallback for mapping.
But isn't the exception supposed to be generic, because we are raising the same exception from multiple places and we are doing a generic message mapping for that? Like for one exception, we are doing one detail mapping.
The idea is that if you can give a detail, for example, if you get an exception that it's value error because you were expecting a Boolean and suddenly you get an integer or a string or whatever, and that is very detailed in terms of what is failing. The type is not right. So that is the exception that gets raised, and that is the one that should be logged if it has a proper mapping for the exception. But you may be saying, if I don't even know what the exception is and I don't have a mapping, just say that failed to update volume or something like that. So it is not a detail. It is detail in terms of you're describing what the problem is, but you describe it in general terms. An exception usually gives you a lot more detail.
But what you are referring to right now is the message inside the exception. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of this was the use cases that were in mind when the feature was designed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I was just saying, like, you're talking about the message inside the exception, but we are not taking that here.
No, not the message is inside. If we get a mapping, and the mapping is, for example, for value error, we say provided value is of the incorrect type. Please, that is more detailed than just saying volume update failed. If you pass an integer in the description instead of a string, and that failed for an update of the volume, it is more detailed to say, hey, the type is incorrect. You at least know that you have to go to see the parameter that you're passing and check the types of the values. But if you just say updating volume failed, that is less generic, less specific.
Yeah, that makes sense in case of value error, but the snapshot is busy I was talking about, it just says snapshot is busy.
And that is the problem that why Brian is bringing this, is that we have no way of passing the exception, but force it to use the type. And that's why I said that in your specific patch, you were being very specific about the errors, and the detail you were providing, that was definitely more important than the exception we were getting. So that's why we are looking for a way to have both options. That you can, in your case, you wanted to, my detail is the important one. Don't do mapping. But in many other Cinder cases, what we have is the reverse, that we want to give priority to the mapping. So we either add do mapping, do exception mapping, or something like that, Boolean parameter, or we want to change the name of add a different parameter for the description so that you can force it. That is what we are trying to figure out how to solve the problem you were having.
Okay, yeah, I get it now. Yeah, that makes sense. Like based on, I'm not sure what, but we can switch between the both.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll put up some kind of patch to do this. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure because either that or rip out the exception mapping, and that seems too extreme. It seems like in some cases that's actually going to be a good thing. So okay, great. All right, thanks. I see Stephen has joined us. Greetings, Stephen. Thank you.
How are you doing?
Good, and thanks for Stephen did a lot of work. Well, actually, all the work on the right getting us onto Alembic and away from sqlalchemy migrate. So we're in a much better position now, but we still have some work to do, and that's what he's going to talk about. So here we go. I'm going to shut up and let you talk, Stephen.
Cool. Yeah. So as of this cycle, migrations for new deployments are all using Alembic, and migrations on like as part of an upgrade, they'll use sqlalchemy migrate to get you to like where we were at the end of last cycle, and then they'll switch everything. They'll dummy apply the first Alembic migration, and then everything from there on out is Alembic based. So that tooling is all in place. There was a couple of kind of bug fixes stuff that went in late in the cycle, but it seems to be working fine. The only stuff that I've seen that I've been working on that's still outstanding from the Alembic side of things, there's the ability to auto-generate migrations from an Alembic basis, which seems very useful. We started using it in Nova. It's useful from a developer perspective, but it's also good in terms of making sure that your migrations and your actual schemas stay in sync. While I've been working on doing that, integrating that auto migration, I've noticed that there are at the moment quite a lot of like small gaps between what's actually in the database and what the migrations, what's in the models, the sqlalchemy models, and what's actually in the database under the hood, what's been imposed on the database by the migrations. So I've been attempting to try and get those shored up and get them synced so that effectively when you say, apply all of the migrations we currently have in tree and then compare them against our models, there should be no differences. Those patches are up there and ready for review, but there's a whole load of to-dos where we had assumed that, for example, certain fields were set to like non-nullable when that's not actually true, which I imagine probably has some impact on things like constraints and that. Those will probably have to be fixed with both schema migrations and data migrations to populate the missing data. And then there's a whole load of other kind of small things that we might want to address. So I'll try and get those finished off this cycle, and it's mostly just a case of kind of getting reviews. And I see, I think Gorka has already reviewed a few of the patches for me, so thank you very much. The other thing, which is not directly related to Alembic, which I probably won't have time to work on, and you might be able to want this for another while, but sqlalchemy 2.0 is coming out, and that is it's going to be a breaking change, basically. So chatting to Zeke about this, they've taken a lot of the learnings from Python 3, like the Python 2 to 3 migration, and the most recent version of sqlalchemy, which is 1.4, that has a whole load of like shims and kind of migration tooling to help get you into the 2.0 world before those deprecated things are actually removed. But there is quite a lot of work here. The model for how you do transactions and stuff has completely changed. You can't do things like nested transactions anymore. You have to be very explicit in the management of things like transactions and connections. Effectively, it's a whole lot of, unfortunately, quite ugly work that needs to be done. I've started doing it in Oslo DB. I've also started in placement in Nova. I don't think I'm going to have time to do it in Cinder, though. So the best I can probably do is to give links to the Cinder, to the Nova and placement stuff, and hopefully those could be used as kind of blueprints. And I'm reluctant to to put more work on his shoulders, but Zeke has been very helpful when I've pinged him a few times, kind of looking for advice on or to review some of my smaller patches. So hopefully you'll be able to get advice from those folks or kind of some other sqlalchemy cores. So those are the two big ones. Finishing off the alembic auto migration stuff and resolving the discrepancies is highlighted, and then preparing for sqlalchemy 2.0 when it comes down the pipeline. Questions?
Do we have a date for sqlalchemy 2?
No, and I suspect when it comes, we're probably going to hold it back via upper constraints for a long time, because, like I said, I've been working on OsloDB and Nova replacement, but Cinder needs some work here. Glance, I think, needs some work. I'm pretty sure Keystone does too. Keystone actually is the only project left using sqlalchemy migrate, which isn't going to be compatible with 2.0. So there's no date, and I think we'll be protected by upper constraints, but it is coming. I just don't know when. Maybe Zeke will know.
Thanks. I have a silly question, silly in terms of I haven't used the alembic migrations yet, so I'm wondering, as far as I understood that I read the previous patches you've been adding, we can already use alembic because you already added the change, like you said, and you create a new versioning table for alembic. But how would I go, for example, to create a new migration right now that you don't have the automation code yet?
Yeah. So the difference between sqlalchemy migrate and alembic, the big kind of difference from a developer perspective, sqlalchemy migrate effectively monkey patched sqlalchemy itself and added things like, for example, you could create a table object, and then it gained like a create method or a delete method whenever you turned on this, or when you imported sqlalchemy migrate. By comparison, alembic is a lot more kind of declarative. You have like an up.create table thing, and you pass in your list of fields and stuff like that. The easiest way to go and write a migration, to be honest, is probably to look at what we've done in the initial migration. Effectively, look at what you've done in the models, like your diff for that, and then just find corresponding operations or refer back to the alembic docs. And you will have to do that for some, if you were to do something weird like, rename a table, but remove some fields in the same process, stuff that kind of confuses the auto generation code. You do have to do it manually, but yeah, there's loads of documentation I found on alembic stuff. The alembic docs themselves are excellent, and you have the initial migration there to kind of demonstrate, a fairly complicated initialization of a database that works the exact same way, basically, as doing a smaller migration.
And for the name of the Python file that we would have to generate, I see that the initial one is under CinderDB migrations versions, right? And it kind of has a prefix that it's not.
Yeah. So there, I'm pretty sure I have a patch up against Cinder to add documentation on how to do this.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
In case I don't, there's, give me a minute, I'll go and find it while I'm not talking. But I have a good doc in Nova that explains exactly the commands that you have to run. Like we use tux, like the virtual, the VM tux environments and stuff, to avoid having to install dependencies or anything. And it just lists the exact command you would do to create a new migration file. The alternative is to manually create one. The template name is very simple. It's like a underscore, like a valid Python file name, so an underscore separated series of words describing the migration. and then a random partial UUID at the end, just to distinguish, similarly named files. The same way that Reno works, the release note tool.
Yeah, but the difference I see is that migration need to be in order, applied in order. So with that random prefix, wouldn't that break it?
No. So that's another difference between sqlalchemy migrate and alembic. There's a lot of differences actually. It's a much better tool, but it doesn't care about file names. The file names are, other than the little commit hash thing at the end of it, that's the only piece that's actually relevant. The rest is just metadata in the file. All of the information about the actual hierarchy is encoded within the file itself. So if you look at an actual, like the migration file that's in there, you'll see at the top there's like a revises comment, and I can't remember what the rest of them, the other comments were.
I see it. Create
that's the actual
revision ID, and
that's the stuff it passes. That's what it cares about. And if that stuff is missing, it'll complain. Alembic also allows you to, you don't need to do things like placeholder migrations, because it allows you to kind of have branches and stuff like that. I've actually disabled those, not disabled them, but I've added a test to prevent those being added, because I don't think it's actually something that we want, that we don't want the complexity of having to maintain multiple branches. And I think it is probably too likely that two people will be working on database migrations at the same time and will inadvertently merge, something that ends up branching on migrations. So I thought it was better to add a unit test and just prevent that stuff from happening. But if you wanted to, it's possible, for example, to detach two commits, two migrations, and insert something in between if you needed to backport a migration. You could do those kind of things. So yeah, effectively, it's not linear. That's the key difference.
Okay, but thank you for adding that, because we prefer to just rebase the patch and make the changes like we were doing before. If two patches were using the same number, one of them would merge first, the other would need to change. And for the backport that you mentioned, that we will no longer need placeholders, that is because, like you say, we can just introduce it in between, right?
Exactly. You can just change the metadata within the file. I haven't fully because I haven't done a backport yet. This is something that I will figure out when I need to do a backport. But again, they have a whole load of documentation in this, and you'd effectively change the previous revision line in the migration above it, and then you change the previous migration in the thing that you're backporting, and kind of inject it in between.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
So at this point, we've got both sqlalchemy migrate files, and we've got the alembic migration file. When we do the Cinder DB sync, it was running the sqlalchemy migrate stuff, and then runs the alembic after, and then that puts the alembic stamp.
If it's an upgrade.
Okay.
So the logic is, if the table, the sqlalchemy migrate versioning information table is there, like its own metadata table that it has to keep track of, which migrations are applied. Okay. If that's present, then it will attempt to apply all remaining migration files. If it's not present, then it'll never enable any of the sqlalchemy migrate tooling.
Okay.
So at some point in future, I guess when sqlalchemy 2.0 is a thing, and we're no longer able to support like the migrate, or sufficient time has elapsed, 3 or 4 cycles, that we don't break fast forward upgrades, you'll be effectively just able to remove that first condition and just delete that legacy migrations folder and remove the sqlalchemy migrate dependency, and nothing should change. The only thing that you might do is add an optional migration to remove the old sqlalchemy migrate table, but it's cruft, and it only affects legacy deployments, so I don't think it's that big a deal.
Okay, so fresh deployments are using Alembic completely at this point.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, so then as far as so then we do not need to worry about, so let me put it this way. So we should not be writing any more sqlalchemy files at all. We should just do Alembic from this point on. So that means,
no more sqlalchemy migrate.
Okay, and so that means for Xena we don't need to have any placeholders available because it's not being used in Xena. Okay,
Correct.
great. Okay.
And I did notice that I forgot to remove references to that in the developer documentation. Any references to creating placeholder migrations, you can strip those out. They're irrelevant now.
So I just had one question regarding the revision ID. So now, like previously, we used to write the number and then the migration. Sorry if I have missed this before the discussion. Now we have a alembic command which generates the revision, like the file. Okay, and it's based out of the top revision we have in our current code. And okay.
Yeah. So you can generate it automatically once this patch that I have under review is available or is merged. Up until then, you would call alembic migrate or generate. I forget the name of the command. Alembic something without this auto generate flag, and it will create an empty file, like a stub template based on a template, a macro template. It will generate that for you, and then you go in and you fill in your information concerning which operations you should apply. In terms of actually applying them, then it's the standard Cinder DB or Cinder manage like DB sync command that you were using previously. The only change is that if you wanted to upgrade to a certain version, previously you'd use an integer. Now you use just that little commit hash at the end. So it's Cinder manage DB up sync, A123F whatever it is, and it will upgrade. I made a decision when I was doing that I wouldn't allow anyone to manually upgrade to one of the old sqlalchemy migrate versions. It was all or nothing. The second you attempted to upgrade, it would insist that it would apply all remaining sqlalchemy migrate things. That was done just because the complexity of the logic exploded. And at least from a Nova perspective, we discussed it and we said it just wasn't worth the effort. If somebody wanted to upgrade to a slightly older version, they could just use the previous version of Cinder, the previous version of the tool we provided in Cinder.
You're referring to the downgrading of revision, like downgrade to previous revision.
I don't think you support downgrades. I don't think anything in OpenStack supports downgrades.
He's referring to a partial upgrade of the database.
Okay.
So instead of migrating to the latest, like we always do, you can tell it just upgrade 1 or 2 so that I can test some things. So he said he supports that for Alembic, but he didn't add it to the sqlalchemy migrate because it was a lot of code and wasn't worth the while.
I personally don't.
Yeah.
I'm not aware, and I highly doubt that anyone outside of a toy deployment is specifying a version to that sync command. I think everyone is just syncing to the latest, but I didn't have enough data to make that decision, so I kept supporting it, but not for the old things. Yeah. Any other kind of questions or concerns?
I think we're good, thanks. So we all have plenty of stuff to review. So yeah, thanks for taking this on, Stephen, and for giving us a good basis. And then if you could pull up that Nova doc you were talking about before.
I will, and I'll go on mute here. I'll stick it in. Oh no, I'll stick it into the Etherpad in this section.
Great. That'd be great. All right, thank you very much.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to go back to the Nova session, so chat to you all later.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. That was really useful because I was just working on two patches that require migrations, and I was like, that's how I ended up reviewing his patches.
Okay, great. Great. All right, so we're meeting with Glance at 14:30. So why don't we take a break? They'll be joining us here, so I'll stop the recording, but I'll leave this open if my system cooperates with me. Yeah, by the way, I think I have it set up so if my system crashes this time, everybody will not be kicked out. I will just disappear. And I remembered I've got BlueJeans on my phone, so I can call back real quick because it takes a while to it leaves my system in a weird state and I got to shut it down and restart it. And anyway, you don't want to hear about that. Anyway, everybody take a break. See you back here at 14:30 and we'll talk about Glance. Thanks.
Right. See you back.
Hi, Brian. Did we stop the recording?
No.